I work for CloudBees, Senior Director of Product Management there. I have set up the Jenkins business there. The talk is fairly simple. I'm going to talk about Jenkins, why Jenkins is important. I'm going to talk about why CloudBees is important, and I'll just talk about what CloudBees has done with the folks at Cloud Foundry for Jenkins. So before I actually get into my talk, I wanted to bring up this slide, and I'm blatantly stealing it from the keynote of the Jenkins founder. Jenkins is fairly popular, and it is so popular that the founder started worrying what is his impact on global warming, if any, has he contributed to global warming. And he found out that so Jenkins has this master-slave architecture. So you have a master, it coordinates with a set of slaves, it tells them where to get the source from, build them, blah, blah, blah. And he found that there are about 182,000 slaves running at any moment doing a build or doing a deployment. He started this is the picture from the Google data center. So this is the new Google data center. And he figured that he could actually put all these machines in that data center. It turns out that you actually need maybe 2 or 3 data centers like these to hold the number of slaves that are running jobs on Jenkins today. So kind of going back to his original question, which was like, did I have an impact on global warming? To support those many machines, the wind farm up at North Bay, if you're, East Bay, if you're driving over the hills, have you seen those? You need one of that to actually power all these machines. So I don't think he walked away fairly happy about what he did for global warming, but he's fairly happy on how Jenkins adoption has played out, right? So as I said, each of these Jenkins is set up as masters and number of slaves, and slaves are doing any number of jobs on any number of platforms. And these are actual live pings coming in from masters running all around the world, right? So every dot here is a master running somewhere. I'm actually waiting for the day something comes up on Antarctica. But that's sort of, all that's coming in. And the main interesting part to me, if I look at this slide and the previous, is all of these dots are coming from, machines. If they are behind a firewall, or we count them in the community as one ping. And we know that behind a firewall, there's usually a ton of Jenkins running, right? So that's interesting. When I look at the $182,000 number, I think of it and think, well, if all of them are running commodity hardware, that's about $1,000 each. People have spent about close to $180 million setting up slaves to run Jenkins. That's phenomenal. And who here is actually not familiar with Jenkins? Pretty good. So as the numbers indicate, it's right up at the top of the most used CI servers. So this is something coming in from the JRebel guys. I have seen equally interesting numbers coming in from Eclipse reports where they've actually asked people on what development tools they used. And Jenkins is the only CI server that actually shows up on the list sort of at the same par as Maven or Ant. I'm kind of surprised that there's no Ant here actually. Now, all those red dots actually, there are about 78,000 installations of Jenkins running everywhere. And one of my main problems with this slide is every few weeks that I present this slide, I need to kind of go in and update the numbers. So there are 78,000 installations everywhere, and we ran a survey 2 years back at the user conference, and at the Jenkins user conference, and we asked people if they were happy with Jenkins. So close to 90% people responded that they are satisfied or very satisfied. Right, that as a product is just says a lot of things. And I happened to work at Sun before CloudBees, and I helped run Glassfish, which is an open source project. So one of the things when you are running an open source project is trying to get a user community, which is what Cloud Foundry is trying to do here, and a community of developers who contribute back. And Jenkins has this really flexible architecture where you can pretty much build any plugin to plug into any system. So there are about 12% or 11.5% people who have contributed a plugin back to Jenkins. We've got to that point where when I used to do something similar back at Sun, I would say like Jenkins has about 100 plugins. Today we have like one plugin being contributed every 2 days. And this does not count people who are using or building plugins behind firewalls, right? So no surprise when it's the number one CI tool. When you talk to people on why they are using it and how they are using it, this is how it breaks down, right? So people primarily start looking at CI. They build stuff. Once they build it, they plug in the testing part, then they plug in the sonar part, and they start sort of release automation, and all that stuff happens with Jenkins, right? And again, this is dated 2 years back, but this year, if you look around, continuous delivery and deployment seems to be the hot topic of the day, right? Everybody seems to be doing that. And if you look at the statistics, about 50% of people were using Jenkins for continuous deployment before, I guess, the topic became hot. So I'm actually kind of interested in seeing what that number translates to this year. Enough of Jenkins, you know this. About CloudBees, we are sort of, we're closely associated with the community. I personally have set up a couple of product lines at CloudBees for Jenkins, the Enterprise Jenkins and Operations Center. My claim to fame is I launched Hudson back at Sun. I've launched I helped set up the Jenkins user conference. So we do all of this in conjunction with the community and working with the community. There's training and consulting that's set up around us to give training around Jenkins. One of the key things for us is the founder and creator of Jenkins, Kosuke, is the CTO at CloudBees. So he looks at us, our sort of, he wears the community hat, he wears the product hat, and we are looking at sort of delivering both in the community and both on the product. So that said, we have a few products that sort of build with Jenkins or on top of Jenkins. So we have like two product lines. One is for the cloud, and one is on-premise. So on the cloud, what we do is we have what we call Dev at Cloud, which is Jenkins running as a service. So what you need to do is you just go in, sign up, get yourself an account, and a master is provisioned for you. Slaves are automatically provisioned for you, and you can deploy from there to any PaaS, right? It could be the CloudBees PaaS. There is a blog that we wrote about how to use Jenkins and deploy to Pivotal web services. So you can just deploy whatever artifacts are built from there onto that. And then in this talk, I'll talk about the on-premise solutions because that's where sort of the Cloud Foundry world actually intersects. So we have two products here, one called the Enterprise and one called the Operations Center. And what the Enterprise product actually does is, given our sort of role in the community, we sort of have delivered the product as plugins that sit on top of open source Jenkins. So we come in, and there are a few categories of plugins that we've sort of built for. And then we come in and provide support for Jenkins. So if you took Jenkins to production in your environment, it's likely that you're going to need some of the plugins that we've built, or you need support on some of the plugins in open source. So where we come in is if you have a Jenkins, we will come in, and if there is an issue, we'll come in and fix that issue. That's classic, I guess, enterprise software. We'll not only sort of fix our plugins, but we'll fix issues with any of the community plugins out there, right? So that's what we provide. More interestingly, these plugins fall in these categories. So if you're thinking of using Jenkins, we've looked at Jenkins open source, and we talked to a lot of people who run large installations of Jenkins to see what they need. And we've divided these into multiple categories. So there's high availability, where a Jenkins master is waited upon by a backup master, and if the primary goes down, the backup comes in and starts taking over. So we're essentially, focused on eliminating downtime there. There's something like backup scheduling. There's folders and roles-based access control, which tends to be used a lot in big organizations where you want to separate teams by their own folders. So you have a dev team, your QA team, they have their own folders, and you can set up security permissions on that. You can set up roles-based access control permissions on that. Right? You can host your own update center. What these plugins actually end up sort of leading you towards is this world where you're picking up sort of, this becomes your Swiss Army knife. You're picking up a few plugins that address the problems that are specific to your installations, right? So going sort of back into what Jenkins does, right? So we've delivered these as plugins, and as I mentioned, the key beauty of Jenkins is this extensible plugin architecture, right? We chose to deliver the product as plugins, and if you kind of take that in your sort of delivering your software or continuously delivering your software, this plugin architecture really works well, right? So at the center you have Jenkins running. You could be running this on CloudBees, or you could be running this by yourself. You could be running up on the public cloud, or you're on premise, on private cloud. There is a plugin that actually talks to a specific tool that addresses that part of the software factory, right? So on the left-hand side, you have simple go and access Git repositories or source Subversion repositories. Push your changes in your binaries into JFrog, and this could be JFrog running on-premise, or the Artifactory that's sitting online. Then you can sort of hand that off to the next stage in the pipeline, where you're doing sort of performance tests, which is what Redline 13 or BlazeMeter or Soasta do for you. Once you're done with that, you can use any of the deployment tools like Puppet, Chef, or BOSH perhaps, and to deploy your artifacts. And you can deploy them to the public cloud, as I mentioned, or on-premise, right? So this plugin architecture actually ends up making Jenkins the central hub around which your software development lifecycle operates, right? And that's why Jenkins is sort of so powerful. I wanted to actually take this concept and drill down into a more specific use case that we actually built in the last few weeks, and we delivered that into open source. So I was in this talk an hour earlier where they were talking about Cloud Foundry and DevOps and how this makes lives of DevOps easier. So here's a specific use case that we did with Jenkins. So whenever you do any build with Jenkins, right, you checked out source code and you generated certain artifacts, Jenkins has the option of sort of fingerprinting that for you. So what that translates to, so let's say you're building a Java Maven job, it automatically fingerprints that for you. And fingerprinting means you're taking an MD5 hash sum. And if that artifact is used anywhere else within Jenkins, right, you can look at the artifact signature and say like, well, this artifact was produced by build so-and-so and so-and-so, and it's got passed through these jobs pipeline. And you can kind of come down and drill into things if things are going bad. But what was missing was if you took the same artifacts, and here's the ops team takes the artifacts, pulls it out, uses Puppet or Chef, and deploys it to a web server or an app server, and something goes wrong. When that something goes wrong, there was, usually there's a manual sort of, dig down and find out what's happening. So what we've done with the plugin architecture here is we worked with the Puppet and Chef guys to sort of give a notification back to Jenkins and tell us the files that they have pushed on, and we'll automatically create an MD5 checksum. So what that ends up doing is if the ops person now deploys this, a plugin kicks in, tells Jenkins that it deployed these these binaries. And now on your, on your Jenkins screen, you can actually see where did, the artifacts that were produced by this actually land up, right? So that's sort of the, so when you're trying to debug stuff, you can actually kind of say like, these var actually made it to deployment server, production server X and staging server Y. So that's the sort of stuff that you can start doing with Jenkins. Now, obviously, when this happens, and getting into the specifics of what we've done here with Cloud Foundry is, when this happens, right, what we see is one team brings it in, they find that, hey, this was pretty useful, I could detect everything here. Let's take the previous example, right? I could completely determine what's happening in my deployment pipeline. Other teams who are trying to go agile or trying to deliver continuously start picking on this. And it's sort of, when I get called into customer conversations, this is the world that they are living in. Every team found that they could do something fantastic, they could deliver stuff, and they have their own masters, they have their own slaves set up, and the IT organization and the CIO comes in and says like, well, why can't we consolidate here? So what typically happens in this environment is we come in and we have a product called the Operations Center by CloudBees. And what this does is it looks at all these Jenkins masters and it consolidates all of them. So you can connect these masters to an Operations Center and you can consolidate all the slaves to a shared cloud that you will end up using, right? And you can optionally give some of the clouds and some of the slaves to the masters and say like, these are your dedicated masters. But the whole idea is you get this sort of architecture where you can now start scaling Jenkins horizontally, right? So you're no longer sort of taking one Jenkins instance and trying to grow it and scale it. Now, what that means for organizations trying to go agile is when you're trying to onboard new teams, you get into these patterns. And the pattern is like, hey, I need this team to go, to deliver continuously. Well, sure enough, take a master, connect that to the Operations Center. The Operations Center takes care of security, and it takes care of plugin version compliance. It takes care of, sharing slaves, et cetera, et cetera. All you need to do is connect the master, use the templates that were created as part of your job, and soon enough, your downstream teams can start getting, rapidly onboarded, right? So that's the sort of the world where we kind of bring sort of some sort of, I wouldn't like to say order to the chaos, but that's what ends up happening. So these are sort of the tools that we built on top of Jenkins, right? And then we started talking to the Cloud Foundry guys here. They were obviously interested in what we are doing, and we ended up being sort of the first partners to deliver into the Pivotal Ops Manager. And what you get here is Jenkins Enterprise. So the idea is that if you're sort of using BOSH to lay out services on your PaaS internally, you obviously need something that's built for production use and hence sort of using Jenkins Enterprise. So you get all the plugins that are installed for you. This is installed via the the Cloud Foundry BOSH Pivotal One Manager, and it includes support from CloudBees. Right. Now, what that ends up doing, and this solution is, I think, right now we are beta testing it. We should be releasing this in the next 4 weeks or so, if I'm right. But what ends up happening in this environment is you push sort of, on Cloud Foundry, you say, I need a Jenkins installed for me. The configuration screen asks you information like what's the disk size for the Jenkins, what's the Java heap memory allocation that it needs to do, and it kind of goes in and lays out that Jenkins for you. At that point, you can sort of register at CloudBees, get your keys, and start using Jenkins as you would normally do. And from here on, you can use any of the standard Jenkins plugins to deliver software that's provisioned on Cloud Foundry, right? You could use the CloudBees deployer plugin, or you're just doing straight up deploy using CF push. So that's where we are today. I think this is step one in a many-step process, but you can clearly see this is just getting you part of the way there, right? You laid out Jenkins Enterprise, but the whole idea with Jenkins is you need a multiple number of slaves that need to be connected. So today we don't address that. So the next obvious step for us is to ask you the number of slaves that you want to lay out, what kind of slaves are these, and then lay them out and connect them back to your Jenkins instance. So that's something that would be upcoming in our roadmap. And then you're taking this world much farther ahead. What we'd like to do is get to this world where if you are running Cloud Foundry, you're likely to be a user who's going back to that use case. That's why I spent that much time on the use case where you're onboarding teams, and those teams need their own Jenkins, and you want those teams to be set up, but there is an IT admin team that's managing all of this, and that needs access to JOC. So we would like to sort of get to the point where you're taking a BOSH and deploying Operations Center and deploying individual Jenkins instances and connecting that back to the Operations Center, and you're sort of good to go from that point on. So that sort of brings me to sort of where we are, where we want to head towards, and brings me to sort of the end of my presentation. If you want to try out what Jenkins Enterprise or Operations Center does for you, you can download a free trial today, and hopefully in a few weeks you should be able to just drive this through the Pivotal One Manager that comes with your Cloud Foundry installation. All right, thank you very much. Any questions? I can take them.